There are places in America where fear never sleeps, where the air feels heavier, footsteps echo long after midnight, and the walls seem to remember everything that ever died within them. From haunted prisons to cursed hotels, each carries a past soaked in tragedy and something that still lingers. Tonight, we're not just talking about ghost stories. These are real documented hauntings, witnessed by guards, tourists, and even investigators who swore never to return. So turn down the lights, because the stories you're about to hear might just make you question every shadow around you. Today, we're exploring the 5 real horror stories from America's most haunted places. And we begin in Pennsylvania, inside a place so silent, even the walls whisper. Built in 1829, Eastern State Penitentiary was meant to reform prisoners through isolation. Instead, it broke their minds. Each inmate lived alone, in total silence. Guards wore soft shoes so prisoners would never hear them approach. Meals slid through narrow slots, and even the light that entered the cell was shaped like a cross, a reminder of salvation they rarely found. But when the prison closed in 1971, that silence didn't end. Visitors began hearing distant cries, metallic clanging from empty corridors, and ghostly shadows darting past cell doors. One security officer described hearing screaming from cell block 12, a long stretch where inmates once went mad from solitary confinement. When he rushed in, every door was standing open, though the keys had been removed decades ago. Paranormal teams later captured whispers that seemed to repeat prisoners' names, and a dark, hooded figure was photographed peering from a corner cell. The face was pale, featureless, almost like a mask. Locals say the prison was built on ground already cursed, land once used for executions during the Revolutionary War. Maybe that's why, even now, people walking past those Gothic towers at night claim to feel unseen, eyes watching them from the windows above. Some say the punishment never ended, it simply outlasted the prisoners. If this story of endless torment chilled you, wait until our next story, where an innocent honeymoon turned into a haunting that refuses to fade. Nestled in the quiet hills of Eureka Springs, Arkansas, stands a grand Victorian building known as the Crescent Hotel. By day, it looks like a romantic getaway, elegant, charming, and bathed in warm light. But by night, its history begins to breathe again, and what it breathes is pure horror. Built in 1886, the hotel's story took a sinister turn in the 1930s when a man named Norman Baker bought it. A self-proclaimed doctor with no medical license, Baker promised to cure cancer using magnetic healing. Hundreds of desperate patients arrived, clinging to hope, but most never left. The basement became his secret hospital, a place of pain, death, and deceit. When the authorities finally exposed Baker's scam, they found jars filled with human remains, organs preserved in formaldehyde, and secret tunnels beneath the building. The Crescent was shut down, but the souls of those who died there seemed to stay behind. Today, guests who check into room 218 often report hearing cries echoing through the walls, furniture moving by itself, and cold hands touching their skin in the dark. That room once belonged to a stonemason who fell to his death during the hotel's construction. His ghost, known only as Michael, still lingers. In the basement, tour guides say you can still smell antiseptic and hear the hum of old medical machines that haven't worked for decades. Some guests have even seen a man in a purple suit, the ghost of Norman Baker himself, wandering the halls, still trying to convince people he can heal them. One night, a security guard caught a glimpse of a woman in a hospital gown standing by the old morgue door. When he turned the flashlight on her, she vanished, leaving behind the faint smell of medicine and roses. Locals believe the hotel acts like a magnet, drawing in restless spirits, trapping them in the same place where they suffered. Investigators call it a vortex of unfinished pain. Even today, if you stand on the 3rd floor at 3 a.m., the lights may flicker. and for a moment, the air feels too thick to breathe, as if the walls themselves are remembering what happened. For many visitors, the Crescent Hotel is a vacation. For the ones who stay a night too long, it becomes a warning. If this haunting hotel gave you chills, then prepare yourself, because our next story comes from a place where the screams of the past still echo across the cold, empty halls. The dead never checked out from the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. There's a kind of silence that only exists in abandoned places, a silence so heavy that it presses against your chest, making you feel like something is still listening. That's the kind of silence that fills the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in Weston, West Virginia, one of the largest hand-cut stone buildings in America and one of its most haunted. When it opened in 1864, it was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place of care and healing for the mentally ill, but like so many good intentions, it didn't last. The asylum was built for just 250 patients, yet by the 1950s, it held over 2,400 souls. Men, women, and even children were crammed together in rotting hallways. Doctors tried desperate treatments, ice baths, insulin shock, electric therapy, anything to control the chaos. But what they created was something worse than madness. Patients screamed through the nights. Some scratched words into the walls with their fingernails. Others simply vanished, their names erased from the records. The building itself seemed to absorb the suffering. Visitors today describe an oppressive atmosphere the moment they step inside, as if the air still carries the pain of the people who lived and died there. The long corridors echo faintly, even when they're empty. Doors slam by themselves. And sometimes, the faint sound of weeping can be heard from the women's ward, even though no one has stayed there in decades. The Civil War added its own layer of horror. During the conflict, Confederate soldiers seized the asylum for military storage. When they left, the building was drenched in blood and trauma, a foundation laid on suffering before a single patient ever arrived. As the decades passed, the place grew darker. Nurses began refusing night shifts after claiming they were being followed. They described shadows that darted across the walls and whispers that called their names. One nurse disappeared during a winter storm in 1938. Her body was never found, but her uniform was discovered in the attic months later. By the 1980s, the asylum was in complete decay. Paint peeled from the walls like dead skin. Broken beds rusted in their corners. The smell of mold and iron hung in the air. Investigators would later call it a monument to human suffering. And yet, the activity never stopped. One of the most haunted sections is known as Ward 4, reserved for the most violent patients. Guards reported hearing furniture scraping across the floor when the rooms were empty. Once, a paranormal investigator left a digital recorder running overnight. When she played it back, she heard the sound of dragging chains, followed by a voice whispering, "I'm still here." Another hot spot is the children's wing, where a small ghost named Lily is said to linger. No one knows who she was, maybe a patient's child, maybe one of the victims of abuse that went unreported for decades. Visitors leave toys for her, and sometimes the toys move on their own. Investigators have captured her voice giggling on tape or softly saying, "Thank you." But the most disturbing part of the asylum lies deep underground, the treatment rooms. Here, lobotomies were once performed in the name of science, dozens every week. Patients were strapped down while sharp instruments were driven into their skulls to cure insanity. Most died. The ones who didn't were left hollow, blank shells of what they had been. When the asylum finally closed its doors in 1994, many thought the horror would end. But what happens to a building that's soaked in nearly 150 years of pain? It doesn't rest. It remembers. Today, the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum is a popular ghost hunting destination, and nearly every visitor leaves with a story. One tourist fainted after seeing a figure crawl out from under a bed. Another group reported seeing doors swing open and close violently, in a hallway with no wind and no ventilation. Even seasoned paranormal experts have fled mid-investigation, claiming something unseen touched or spoke to them. Cameras malfunction, batteries drain instantly, and strange cold spots form like invisible hands gripping your throat. But perhaps the most terrifying moment came during a live investigation broadcast in 2012. The team was filming in the women's ward when one of the cameramen screamed. He said he felt something grab his wrist and pull, hard enough to leave bruises shaped like fingers. When they reviewed the footage later, a shadowy figure could be seen standing directly behind him for 3 frames, but no one had seen it during filming. Since then, even skeptics have called the asylum impossible to explain. Locals believe the asylum's walls absorbed more than just sound. They absorbed the souls of those who died there. Some say that at night, the building breathes, the windows exhaling cold air, the floorboards creaking like bones. Others think the spirits inside don't even realize they're dead, trapped in an endless loop of confusion and fear. The town of Weston tried to demolish it once, but workers refused to continue. Their tools went missing. Machines broke down without reason. One man fell from a scaffold and swore he was pushed. They stopped construction and never tried again. Now the asylum stands like a mausoleum, towering over the quiet town, surrounded by rusting gates and overgrown weeds. During the day, it's almost peaceful, but when the sun sets, something inside it seems to awaken. Visitors walking by after dark have reported seeing faces pressed against the windows, not reflections, but pale, hollow faces that vanish when you look twice. Some say the asylum is cursed, that those who enter leave a piece of their soul behind. Others believe it's a reminder that madness isn't always born inside a mind sometimes. It's born inside a place. Even after all these years, people who enter the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum swear that they don't walk out the same. Something follows them, a feeling, a whisper, a shadow that never quite lets go. If you listen closely, you might still hear the echoes of those who were forgotten, crying, scratching, begging to be released. But the asylum never lets go of its secrets. It never has. If this story of tortured souls trapped within their own asylum chilled you to the core, then stay with us. Because next, we travel to a place where evil wasn't born, it was invited. A quiet house in Rhode Island, known to the world as the real-life conjuring haunting. Deep in the woods of Harrysville, Rhode Island, sits a quiet farmhouse, a white, weathered home built in the 1700s, surrounded by fields that always seem a little too still. To anyone passing by, it looks peaceful, ordinary. But for one family in the early 1970s, it became a living nightmare that would later inspire one of the most chilling horror films of all time, The Conjuring. When Roger and Carolyn Perrin moved into the house with their 5 daughters in 1971, they thought they had found their dream home. It was spacious, affordable, and came with acres of land. But almost immediately, something felt wrong. The air inside the farmhouse was heavy, and every room seemed colder than the last. At first, it was small things, footsteps in empty hallways, doors creaking open on their own, faint whispers that seemed to come from the walls. Then came the smell, the unmistakable scent of rotting flesh that would fill certain rooms for minutes, then vanish. The parents tried to ignore it. They told themselves the old house was just settling, but they couldn't ignore what happened next. One morning, Carolyn was sweeping when she noticed a dark stain on the kitchen floor, shaped like blood. No matter how many times she scrubbed it, it came back. At night, the girls said they heard voices calling their names. One of them woke up to find her bed floating inches above the ground before crashing down. The haunting grew stronger with every passing week. Furniture moved by itself. Clocks stopped at exactly 3:07 a.m. Doors slammed without wind. And then came the presence. Carolyn began to see a woman dressed in old, tattered clothes watching her from the corner of her vision. The woman's eyes were hollow, and her skin looked burned. The family later learned that her name was Bathsheba Sherman, a woman who lived on the property in the 1800s and who was rumored to be a witch. According to legend, Bathsheba sacrificed her own child to the devil, then cursed anyone who tried to live on her land. When she died, locals refused to bury her near the church, believing her soul was damned. And now the parents believe she had returned, angry, vengeful, and desperate to reclaim her home. The activity escalated until it became violent. Carolyn would wake up with bruises on her legs, shaped like fingers. The girls were pulled by their hair or thrown from their beds. Once a heavy door slammed shut so hard it shattered the frame. The family turned to investigators Ede and Lorraine Warren, the famous paranormal couple later portrayed in The Conjuring. The Warrens immediately felt the presence of something dark. Lorraine, a clairvoyant, claimed she saw a black mass moving through the house and said Bathsheba was trying to possess Carolyn. They attempted a cleansing, but it went horribly wrong. During the ritual, Carolyn's body contorted in unnatural ways, her voice changing, her eyes rolling back. The Warrens stopped the ritual, terrified they had made things worse. After that night, the parents refused to let anyone else interfere. They learned to live with the haunting because leaving wasn't an option. When they tried to move, their finances collapsed and every buyer backed out. It was as if the house wouldn't let them go. Years later, after the family finally left, the new owners also reported strange occurrences: cold spots, objects disappearing, and dark shadows moving across the walls. Even paranormal teams who investigated decades later said the house still felt alive. In 2019, the current owners invited investigators to stay overnight. Cameras recorded faint voices, unexplained banging, and a woman sobbing coming from the basement when no one was there. One investigator even claimed his equipment was lifted off the floor and thrown against the wall. And yet, despite everything, no one has been able to prove what exactly lives inside that house. Was it truly Bathsheba Sherman's spirit, or something far older, something that used her name as a mask? The haunting of the Perron family remains one of the most well-documented supernatural cases in American history. It's not just the fear they felt, it's the evidence left behind. Witnesses, police reports, visitors who refused to ever return. To this day, the farmhouse still stands, quiet and empty, surrounded by trees that seem to lean closer with every passing year. Tourists who visit say the air feels strange the moment they step onto the property, like being watched by something unseen. Those who have spent the night describe dreams so vivid they wake up screaming, of burning faces, of voices whispering "leave," of a woman standing at the foot of the bed, smiling. And yet the house endures. Some say Bathsheba still walks there, trapped between worlds. Others believe the land itself was cursed long before she ever lived. Whatever the truth may be, the Conjuring House remains a monument to something far beyond human understanding. A reminder that evil doesn't always need an invitation. Sometimes, it's already home. Even now, decades later, paranormal investigators continue to hear the same things. Knocks from the attic, the faint laughter of children, and that eerie, dragging sound that moves from room to room, as if someone is packing through time, forever trapped in their own haunting. The Perron family never forgot what they saw, and neither will you, because once you learn about this house, it has a strange way of following you, even after the story ends. If the cursed tale of the Conjuring House sent chills down your spine, then stay close, because our next story will take you to a place where darkness isn't trapped inside a building, it's buried beneath an entire city. Welcome to New Orleans, St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, the resting place of America's most powerful spirits. New Orleans is a city unlike any other. beautiful, mysterious, and haunted by its past. Its narrow streets hum with jazz, its air heavy with the scent of rain and magnolia, and something else, something darker that lingers after midnight. Because beneath the charm of the French Quarter lies a place where the dead don't sleep. It's called St. Louis Cemetery Number 1, the oldest and most infamous burial ground in the United States. Locals call it the City of the Dead, and once you see it, you'll understand why. Built in 1789, the cemetery was created after a devastating fire, and a deadly yellow fever outbreak swept through the city. Thousands died, and the ground, soaked from constant flooding, couldn't hold them. Graves would rise, coffins would float, and so the city began to bury its dead above the ground, in white stone tombs stacked like houses. But over time, those tombs became more than just graves. They became doors. Doors between our world and something else. Every tomb, every name carved in stone, has a story, and some of those stories refuse to stay buried. One of the most feared belongs to Marie Laveau, the voodoo queen of New Orleans. She was a woman of beauty and power, a healer, a spiritual leader, and to some, a witch. During her lifetime in the 1800s, she ruled the city's underground spiritual world. Politicians, judges, and even the police sought her blessings or feared her curses. When she died in 1881, she was buried in the family tomb within St. Louis Cemetery Number 1. But her death didn't end her reign. Visitors began reporting visions of a woman dressed in white, walking among the tombs, her head wrapped in a crimson cloth. Some said she appeared during voodoo rituals, others during storms, her face illuminated by lightning. She would glare at intruders, then vanish into mist. People still visit her grave today, marking X symbols on her tomb and leaving offerings, beads, coins, rum, begging her for luck or mercy. But disturbing her tomb without respect is said to come at a terrible price. One tourist, mocking her legend, kicked over a candle left by a believer. The next day, he was found in his hotel room alive but shaken. He claimed he saw a woman standing over his bed whispering, "Respect the dead." His hair had turned partially white overnight. But Marie Laveau isn't the only restless soul trapped within these walls. There's the ghost of Henry Viens, a sailor who died after being betrayed by a friend who sold his family tomb. With nowhere to rest, Henry's spirit roams the cemetery at night, asking visitors if they know where his grave is. His voice is faint, broken, echoing softly between the marble walls. Then there's the Almonaster Vault, where visitors claim to hear scratching from inside the tomb. Some say it's just rats. Others believe it's the sound of someone who was buried alive centuries ago. And deeper inside the cemetery lies a cluster of forgotten tombs, their names long erased by time. Locals avoid them, saying those were the cursed ones, victims of rituals gone wrong. Paranormal investigators have captured readings so high there, even their cameras refuse to work. One described the air as thick, electric, alive, as if the dead were standing inches from my face. At night, the cemetery transforms. The air turns colder. The wind whistles through the narrow pathways like distant voices. The moonlight makes the tombs glow, pale and ghostly, like faces staring out from the dark. Security guards who patrol the area speak of shadows that move on their own, and footsteps that echo behind them even when the gates are locked. One guard quit after he heard his own name, whispered from a tomb that had been sealed for over a century. Locals say that at 3 a.m., if you stand near Marie Laveau's tomb, you'll hear faint chanting carried on the wind, a rhythm like a heartbeat, steady and low. Some say it's the spirit still performing rituals that never ended. St. Louis Cemetery Number 1 is not just haunted, it's alive. Each wall holds centuries of grief, betrayal, magic, and death. The city's humid air feeds it, keeping it awake, restless. Even modern construction crews refuse to work near it after dark. Tools vanish, lights flicker, and some workers say they've seen faces watching them from inside broken tombs. There's an old saying in New Orleans: the dead here don't rest, they just wait. And maybe that's true, because no matter how many walls surround this place, the energy inside can't be contained. In 2015, the cemetery was closed to the public after too many visitors vandalized the graves. But even now, tour guides who pass by claim they still hear the sound of weeping. Some nights, candles flicker behind the locked gates, small orange flames dancing where no one should be. A journalist once asked a local priest if he believed the cemetery was truly haunted. He smiled and said, "In this city, the dead are part of the living. You don't fear them, you live with them." Maybe that's why New Orleans still feels so haunted, because here, death never truly left. Every Halloween, locals leave offerings by the gate: flowers, letters, even whispers. They say it's not for fear, it's for respect. Because in the city of the dead, every shadow could be someone listening. And if you ever find yourself walking near those walls after midnight, you might feel a gentle tap on your shoulder, cold and soft, like a breath from the other side. If you turn around, you'll see nothing, but you'll know you've been noticed. Because in St. Louis Cemetery Number 1, no one ever walks alone. If the restless spirits of New Orleans gave you chills, remember this: haunted houses, cursed hotels, prisons filled with pain, they all have one thing in common. They prove that some places never forget. And maybe, after hearing these stories, neither will you. Because the next time you hear a whisper in the dark, or a footstep when you're alone, maybe it's not your imagination. Maybe it's one of them. If you thought these stories were terrifying, remember, these are just a glimpse of America's darkest corners. Shadows still whisper in those halls, and some doors never stay shut. Tell me, would you dare spend a night there? Subscribe now, more true horror awaits in the next episode.